here with the Ground Rooster Ranch YouTube channel, and in this video we're going to teach you everything you need to know to take your kid fishing. You might think that this is what you need, but we're going to whittle it down to a lot less. So let's go. There we have it. This is all you really need in order to take your kid fishing. Now, clearly the fishing rod is based on someone being about 5 years old and up. There's a lot of different things that you're going to find on the internet that are going to tell you what you can do. But we're going to simplify this down to make it not only cheap, easy, but it's going to be really fun to do with your kids. So let's get into it. Alright guys, so here's what we're going to start with. We're going to start with a bait casting rod. This is a used bait casting rod. You can see how it's short. It's actually still really fun to use as an adult because they're very durable. Sometimes the reels that come with them are not as strong as they should be, and they don't have the capacity to take on some of the larger fish. But for a child's fishing rod, this is perfect. You're going to find several different kinds of these products out in the shelf, and they'll be themed based on characters that kids will be familiar with. You don't have to do that. This particular fishing rod has no theme associated to it. It's called a Shakespeare pitch and stick. This rod is only about $18 Canadian in our local stores. Some of the other rods come with complete kits. I've opted not to do that because some of those kits have useless things in them. This particular rod is going to be a cheap option for you to get out and get fishing with your kid. Let's get it opened up here and we'll cover off some of the features. You have a very basic rod and reel setup here. They come like this. The reel itself has a metal handle, which some of them have a plastic handle. They're not as durable. You have the casting button, the drag button, which is actually a roller that rolls to put more drag on one side and less drag on the other. Drag is a feature of how much resistance the string has. So if I turn the drag up, the string is hard to pull and is more likely to break. If I turn the drag down, the fish is just going to run away and take all your line with it. So you got to have a happy medium there where your line is strong enough to hold back the fish without breaking, and so that you can actually effectively reel it in. Very simple, very easy to use. You'll notice that the difference between this and a lot of other reels is that the actual reel itself is encased inside of a plastic housing, where a lot of other reels, like a spinning reel or trolling reel, will be open to the elements. This causes a lot of tangles, and we're going to cover the tangles issue in a minute. What we're going to do here is we're going to set up the rod initially so that we can we're going to put a swivel on it for this. We're going to take the line. Like I mentioned before, you should have a pair of toenail clippers actually in your tackle box, because when it comes to trimming line and resetting hooks, they work the best. So we're going to run the line through the eyelets. This is what allows the line to be cast out. What we're going to do now is we're going to tie this line. We're going to put a loop at the end of it. The reason we're going to do this is that there's a whole lot of complicated different knots that you can learn to do, but as a starting out parent or as a kid learning how to fish, you don't need to do that. The fishing rod here is only built to deal with 2, 3, 4 pound fish, maybe at most, depending on the line you have on it. The line on here right now is likely around 4 pounds test, which means that it takes about 4 pounds in order for it to snap and break. We're going to use just a standard loop that you can use to switch between different things so that you're not caught up tying lines all day to change the situations for hooks and lures and the environment you're in. So I got a big piece of line here. We're just going to tie a loop in the end of it. So let's make a decent sized loop here, because we're going to put either a swivel or we're going to put a hook itself on it. Yeah, don't be afraid to use a bit of line in order to get things done. There's lots of line there. You'll never outcast your line. Make this loop, pull it tight. You notice how the loop doesn't actually slip. We're going to keep it in here like this so it doesn't slip, and we're going to slip it through where we need it to. So I have a very small swivel here Now I know it's going to be hard for you guys to see, but once you have your loop put together, there's a way to get this bad boy on here without having to actually tie it on here. You can push the loop through the swivel. So now the swivel is sitting on top of the loop like this. You open up the loop to go around the swivel and bring it back, and ta-da, you have attached your swivel. Now what this means is that you don't have to have swivels. They're not very expensive considering, but if you don't have a swivel, you can use the same method to tie on an anchor or a lead weight for anchoring, or you can tie on a hook directly. It doesn't matter. The swivel is going to be really important though when it comes down to attaching, say, a lure or a hook, even just something to practice casting with. It gives you a little extra weight too. If you're doing bait fishing and you're going to put a hook on here with bait, it gives you something that holds your bait down and keeps it from floating up too high once you put a bobber on. We'll get to that. Well, now that we have our swivel on, the first thing we're going to do is deal with the tangling issues. We're going to stretch the line. So you're going to take your rod, your string, you're going to hook it around and hook that swivel back over to it, or you can just use a loop. It wouldn't matter. If you don't have a swivel, just put the loop around it and tie it to the doorknob. Make sure your swivel or your loop's closed. And now we're hooked to the door. Now what we're going to do is we're going to actually going to come back and we're going to pretend like we're fishing on the door. You're going to pull on it, you're going to get your drag to release, and then you're going to reel it down so that the string actually stretches straight. What'll end up happening if you don't do this, when you cast this reel the first time, it will go out and then the string will lay on the top surface and it'll coil and look like a big long loopy screw on top of the surface. That issue will turn out to clog your reel when you reel it back in because there's a natural twist in it. So the further you can go when you tie this to a doorknob or whatever you end up tying it to, and give this rod a few good yanks back, that will straighten that string out, keep it from wanting to naturally curl again on its own afterwards. And you're taking out that natural tension in the string. Very important step, especially with these reels where they're really hard to get untangled because they're all encased and housed inside of a plastic cover. Important step. Here's the hook. That's what you need in order to catch fish with bait. Now, in my case, we're using worms or grub or something that we know will attract them. There's other hooks. There's circle hooks, which are self-setting. You can get them barbless, or you can make these barbless. These ones here have to be set, so your kid will have to actually pull back on the reel when they get a bite in order to set this hook. This one won't set without you pull it on it. The other ones, they'll set themselves and they'll drop into the corner of the mouth, and they will actually do a really good job of staying on. Unless the fish jumps and thrashes, then you just have to keep tension on the line. We're going to show you how to put this on. Now in this case here I have a swivel, but you'll notice that there's a little hole here in the top of that hook. Now some of these hooks, they're not completely encased, so they're not closed off completely. So this may be the reason you want to use a swivel. You don't need to have the swivel for bait fishing. You just don't. These are more for lure fishing because lures like to have their own action. That's why I put the swivel on there. Keep in mind it has the same hole that you shove the line through on the swivel. You could do the same here. You do not need the swivel. And close this little swivel off. Ooh. Always a risk of jabbing yourself in the fingers. I know I am. There. Hook, swivel. Now what else do you need? A few simple things. In this case where I have the hook on the bottom, I'm going to need a split shot weight. I'll get one out here. The big thing to remember about weights is that typically they're lead because they need to be malleable and you need to be able to move them. This is why you want to go to the hardware store and buy a $2 set of needle nose pliers. On the back side there's an open mouth that you pinch and that will open the weight up. You can place the line inside on the crimp side of this. And you'll know the difference because there's a detent. There's a little spot where the two will overlap once you close them. Now they're actually quite malleable, so if you're strong enough, you can just pinch them together like that, and the line will stay in there. But you can use your needle nose pliers to keep it on there. So I'll use the needle nose pliers in this case. Set it up, give it just a little squeeze there. It's on, so that it can't move left or right. And there's one more thing you're going to need. Give myself a little bit more line. This is a float or bobber, and there is a way to put these on. Now they have two hooks, two open hooks, one on the bottom, one on the top. And you can see the one on the top is covered by a sleeve, and typically quite hard to get to. What you want to do is the bottom one goes on the bottom, facing towards the hook. You got to push the entire setup up so that the hook is protruding. You run the line across it, let the hook go back down, and now it's hanging off that line. Now the issue is which way do you go with it? The little cup on the top of the bobber has to go towards the top of the rod. So you twist it up. There it is. You make sure you're not pushing the bottom of that rod or of that hook down, and the spring-loaded hook here will come up on its own. You'll lay the string in beside it. And if you push it down far enough, boom, there it is. Your bobber is now in line and attached to the string. What you want to remember is that the size of the fish that you're catching is going to be directly proportional to the size of the hook you have. This is a fairly large hook actually, and this would take worms. In our case, if we were fishing trout, you can get a little bit bigger. That's about as big as I would go for fishing trout. They don't have a very big mouth. You can use a lot smaller hooks and a lot less bait to catch them, just depending on where you're at. There's many versions of floats and bobbers. There's so many versions that I'm not even going to cover it. This is just your basic setup. This setup here, that bobber would be 50 cents. Entire package of these split shot anchors would be $3, and a package of hooks would be $1. You're out on the water, you're out, set up, ready to go for under $20. That's a pretty good deal, especially when you're trying to get your kids off their electronics. And you can reuse them. And if you break it and it gets hung up in the bottom, you don't have to worry too much. You're going to have more in order to reset it. So let's undo this one here, and we're going to go to a different setup. We're going to go to a bottom bait setup. This setup here is going to float on the top at the water line. Let's change it around here. This is going to float in the water. This is going to hold your bait down. This is what your fish are going to grab onto. If you can do this, you're fishing like a pro with your kid, no time. Now you can move that weight closer or further away depending on how fast the water is. Just go out and try it out, see how you do. One thing I'm going to recommend you do, in most cases with kids where you're going to do catch and release, I'd ask that you would clamp down on the barb. So take your needle nose pliers, take that barb, squeeze it. Squeeze this one flat. There it is. The reason I do that is because you're just going to be doing catch and release, and that barb will do an immense amount of damage to the fish, especially if you're not going to take it for food. So we don't want to do a whole lot of damage. We want to keep a nice sharp hook so we have a good set, but the barb for catch and release is what's going to prevent you from releasing a healthy fish. Let's get rid of that, okay? Unless you're going to keep your fish and fry them up. And depending on regulations, you may not be allowed to have a barb anyway. So I'm going to take the bobber off here. So the bobber's the indicator. This float will indicate when you have a bite. When it goes under the water, you've got a fish on. That's how you know. Simple as that. We're going to take the weight off the line. I open it. This is split shot weight. Put it back, save it for another day. And I'm going to take the hook off. Now, the last setup, we were floating on top of the water, trying to catch fish around the top. But if it's middle of the day and it's hot, your fish are at the bottom of the lake or the river or wherever they're hiding behind some rock. and you need some way of getting down there to catch them. So this is a very light setup, but this is called a bell anchor. Now that's just replaced the hook. The bell anchor is going to go, it's going to take your hook all the way to the bottom. The fish are down at the bottom, lazy in the bottom hole. This is going to get you down there. But what you need to do is put your hook on the line halfway up. We're going to give ourselves a little bit of line here. We're going to tie that same loop in the line about a foot, 12 inches from the weight. Look, and now I have a loop in the middle of the line, halfway up. We have the weight in the bottom. Now we've got our hook sitting with our loop from our fishing line through it. We're going to take that hook, we're going to put it through the center of that loop, and then we're going to pull the loop taut on the hook. Just like this. We're done. Young one casts it out. You're going to have a line with a weight sitting on the bottom, and that hook's going to be dangling with whatever bait you are able to put on it. And that is what will catch you a bunch of fish for your little one. That's two very simple, very easy ways. It's not the only way. There's lots of different ways. This is just to get you out there. The bobber method is great up until the point in time where there's wind. And wind is going to drive your bobber all around. That's a factor. If you're fishing in deep holes in a hot day, you're going to want to have a setup like this that's currently hooked on there so that you can get down to the bottom and you can get to where the fish actually are. This is bait fishing 101, so that you can get out and catch some fish with your little one. The swivel setup lets you use any hooks and lures that are available to you for your area for whatever species you're doing. It also lets you switch over to bait. So I don't want to limit you, but I warn you that from initially in this video, this is a very addicting hobby. It's a great hobby to have. It gets you outdoors, gets you sunburnt and bit by bugs. And it's going to take over your life like it has for me. We spend all summer doing stuff like this. We fish in freshwater and saltwater. One thing I'm going to mention is that there is a difference with these rods and any rod and reel. When you go out in saltwater or freshwater. If you're fishing in freshwater, you don't really have a need in order to hose up down everything and clean it all out. If you're going to take this into saltwater, make sure you clean it out after, clean it up with fresh water afterwards. Use your sink, use a garden hose, something that you have around the house, and rinse the reel. I've seen these get rusted up so bad in one night after being in saltwater that they were almost unusable, and we had to go to extreme lengths in order to salvage them. The other thing is that you want to make sure you know whether or not your kid can cast, reel by themselves. They don't have to bait the hook by themselves. They don't have to land the fish by themselves. But you're not allowed to reel it in for them if you don't have a license. You're not allowed to cast it out for them if you don't have a license. You have to be licensed. Most areas, kids under the age of 16 are not required to be licensed in order to go catching a fish, depending on where you're at in the world. If you do require a license in your particular state or province, you want to check with your local authorities to see what the regulations are about this. Be safe about it. If you are gonna even so much as cast the bait out, cast the line out for your kid, go online or go to your local store and buy yourself a fishing license. Get that done, because it's really hard not to help your kids when they're trying to do something, and you want to see them be successful, especially in this age bracket for this rod and reel. Everything after this becomes personal preference. The rods get bigger, the reels get bigger. You might start fishing from a boat, and you might start fishing from just your ponds. You can go to a U-fish. If the U-fish is in operation, you typically don't need a license for that either, and it gets you some hands-on experience with some very experienced folks nearby that you're actually going to catch fish, and you only pay for what you catch. Fishing is something that we've done our whole lives, and it's something that your ancestors did if you go back at least 1 or 2 generations, and it's something that you enjoy doing if you're sick and tired of your kids sitting on a tablet all day and yelling at their screens when it comes to video games. Bait. Now I know you've heard me talk about some of the bait that we're using in this setup. You can use a bunch of different things. Make sure you follow your state and local regulations. Sometimes live bait is not allowed, minnows and things like that. If you have any questions, contact your local fisheries or wildlife enforcement station, and you'll be able to get the information you need, especially particular to an area in which you're going. Bait can be bought easily. If you're looking at getting bait, you usually get it at the same place that you buy your fishing supplies. Or if you have the outdoor facilities, go dig them up out of the ground. Get a plastic container, such as a butter dish, poke a few holes on the top of it, put some dirt in there, put some worms in there, and they're good to last in the fridge for about a week, maybe even more, depending on how big the dish is and how many worms you have in there. I'm not going to talk about lures as bait because that's everyone's opinion. It depends on who you ask. But by the time you get through your worm adventures, you can start doing your own research, and maybe we'll cover that in an upcoming video if depending on the interest. Have fun, get out there, see you on the water.